Well, hello everyone. Here to show you right here. I'm talking about for the child tax credit right here, and we all know that most parents will probably know, of course, is that yeah, that whenever it comes to whenever you file your taxes, and of course whenever you pay earn any source of tax credit, it is, and a lot of times it's like yeah, that it all kind of starts by putting a few coins into a piggy bank or any source of savings, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way. That yeah, that for the most part, that you're saving your money and of course using your money properly, is a lot more than just what you call it's like this ordinary accounting, and also anything else that you might think about. Is like anybody say is toward it, yeah, that as soon as you get a paycheck, a lot of times it's like, what's the first thing that you really think about whenever it comes to understanding about finances, and then also how much money you have left if you spend a little bit. And a lot of times people would probably say too that even if you spend a little bit that you want to kind of think about as to where how much do you have left in a but still it talking about with most children though, and if we're talking about a tax credit right here, that we're talking about like yeah, up to if it's up to for three children or so, up to up to 1,000 or up to $3,000 per child or something like that. Which I know that what they're talking about is up to I think it's up to two or up to $1,000 per child or something like that. If I can remember, I heard that it's up to 3,000, but still that by increasing the minimum wage and all, but still the way I think about it too, though, that what does it usually mean when we think about tax credit? Any sorts of bonuses and any sorts of credit, and we could probably think too is to where that's another way of how you want to say is toward it. Yeah, well, any source of credit that is paid to you, but through like yeah, through the state or like through the government, and the way I think about it too, though, that if we're talking about children of the family, or of the married couple, I'm like, oh yeah, if, especially if the following status, of course, is through married, that there is going to be a couple that whenever they pay certain tax rates on top of that just and that they're going to claim that that's a son or daughter of whom the part of the family, and all, so in a lot of ways, it sure seems that way. That when we describe as toward it about how many dependents are in the family, and for who is claimed to be, which called about the citizenships and all. But I'm just trying to talk to everybody here about talking about the tax credit here, and whenever I was doing the studies about the tax credit, a lot of times it sure seems that way. That that how come yeah, how come we cannot think ahead of time? So I was also thinking too that how come you can't use your tax return, of course, think ahead of time and put 2022 on your tax return. And everybody thinking too that well, you probably could, but as long as you don't get that mixed up with with the rest of the other tax documents. So like it sure seems that way that yeah, tax files. It's all about that. Is it really about thinking backwards? Thinking backwards. Thinking thinking backwards based on the calculations, and I'll put on here recorded from the past 15 months. And I can just say that, and I know like everybody else would probably say too that any source of tax documents that we think about, that when we think about this, so talk about for tax time, no, why is it that most of the time, no, that whenever you look at the tax papers, that you want to know too, that why is it that you might see certain amounts, and let's just say if it's maybe a little bit more or less, and that's another thing too I want to talk about here. Talk about for more or less. So if we were to actually do the math right here, and I know the state, and then of course the federal, they're going to have it to where that they're going to calculate these amounts of income, and let's just say that between single and then between married filers, and a lot of times it sure seems that way. That when we think about more or less right here, and let's just say that a lot of times it seems like that all depends on if you paid up more during that period of the year, or or maybe if anything that if you move from state to state, or maybe if you were I think a lot of it had, of course, a lot of it has to do with the fact about if one independent of the family was employed, or if they were going to school, or if about how many of them are considered to be U.S. citizens. But I was doing the studies about the math right here. I'll talk about for tax time, and it sure seems that way that more or less. So if you paid more than on the average from how for how much money you make, or if it's all measured about the fact about that if you've already paid your fair share of your taxes during the earlier years. So it's like it sure seems that way that about every 2 years or so, like I would say on average about every 2 years or so, that the tax amounts that are calculated. And so it sure seems that way that when we think about that, though, is that why is it that it seems like that with by every tax season, though, that we were toward it, that when we think about paychecks, and when we think about our taxes, a lot of times that whenever you first started doing your taxes, that whenever you first start doing your taxes, though, a lot of times, most of the time, that you'll be given a form to which you would have to show to the tax office, right? And then that form is going to explain about the calculations based on how much money that you pay to the state, and how much that was withheld, from in regards to taxes and everything. So it sure seems that way that that a lot of times that you want to know too that whenever we think about our taxes, though, a lot of times, are we necessarily thinking about are we necessarily thinking about the calculations for how much money that something's worth, and based on the fact about for who's working and who's collecting certain benefits, and based on any source of insurance or anything like that. So a lot of times it's like doing a lot of the math and doing a lot of figuring out, right? But at the time, it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to understanding about how taxes work, a lot of times, and everybody else will probably say too that how come whenever you file your taxes, though, maybe how come you can't start out with the information based on what you assume or what your plan is, to where if you're thinking about within the next year that you're planning on having a full-time job, or maybe if you're planning on maybe going to school, or maybe joining a scouting group or anything like that. And so a lot of times, like everybody else would say too, that they've already got their plans and agendas for what they would like to do by 2022, and by next year. And so it's like how come maybe tax papers can't work like that, to where that look at the benefits that but like anybody says, to where whenever we think about this, and it seems like it has to be explained the proper way, but whenever we think about our tax documents, though, it sure seems that way, that the first thing is first, is it's about calculating the amount of money about your activity. It's all about calculating recording those tax dollars paid to you during that 12 months period. So a lot of ways when we think about that though is that how come you can't say on those tax documents to where I assume that this is what I'm going to be doing for the next year, or how come you can't write down the calculations for how much money that you would like to make compared to what you already made? And I know, like everybody else would probably say too, that if the system were to work like that, then chances are that there will probably be a lot of mistakes and a lot of errors on the documents. So a lot of times it's like, taking care of your taxes has always been about recorded data. Whenever you do start a job, or whenever you do earn any source of credit or some sort, any source of credit, that hasn't always been like that, to where that it goes by rewinding the chapter, to where you look back at 2 years of your tax returns, and most of that information would already be updated and released. And so it's like, so when we think about tax time, no, it sure seems that way, that not everybody, maybe not everybody really wants to think backwards and thinking as to what about how much money were you making from last year, and how much did you pay in your taxes from last year and compared to what's going on now. And so it sure seems that way, that when we think about tax documents though, that you weren't, to where that how come we can't think about our goals and achievements for what's next ahead. And so when we think about a tax credit right here, that it sure seems that way, that that any child might even say too that it's nice to receive at least $100 or maybe $200 or so from out of a month or so, in like any source of allowance or something. What exactly is an allowance? And I can tell everybody here that an allowance, allowance is, it's basically that's earnings paid to that paid to that dependent. Paid to that you're dependent, and I can also say you're paid to the child, based on the work, and it can maybe also be the behavior. I'm like, in case of anybody that may want to know too, that if you've been good all week, and then we can go ahead and pay you a little extra on that. And then also it's another way of stating as to where that a lot of kids will probably say too that I'm like, for who I can also maybe put for who who is the oldest. So a lot of times it's like, how many parents are going to maybe raise their hand and say that you get that almost all the time in a household, that for sure that whoever that's going to be the oldest child, it thinks that I think I deserve 2% more just because that I was able to help out with the dishes or with the laundry around the house or something like that. Nobody asked me to do this. I just did it at my own time. That sort of stuff. But still, that so it sure seems that way, that when we think about a tax credit most of the time, it sure seems that way, that by the time the money is there, and by the time that the refund comes in, and it's like people are probably thinking too that just like maybe like most insurance claims or something like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that if there's any sorts of lessons learned about whenever you do get a return and a 102, that knowing it, that if there's like what you call this a fair amount right here, to where for who gets what, and especially if it's after the holidays or something, or if it could be money that was supposed to be paid to you from the year earlier or something like that. So a lot of times that you might hear that, to where that if we look at the tax documents, that you would see that, to where that credits or any source of credit or any source of income that is paid to the married couple per child. And let's just say that that the amount of money that was paid to you based on the corrections made on your tax return. So in case that there's any parents that might even say that, yeah, based on the calculations recorded though, so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that maybe that's another reason why that the tax offices usually do their estimates based on, information that was already recorded. Like, let's just say if it's money that should have been paid to you from maybe 6 months earlier, and at the time that maybe that 102, that's one of the reasons why tax offices do that, is that just to calculate based on the paperwork on the database that yeah, this is money that should have been paid to you from earlier. And so I know that a lot of tax places would probably explain to the married couples that that money, of course, is going to be paid to you, but still that it's like, whenever we think of our taxes, though, that you're probably thinking is toward yeah, well, every paycheck that you see tax amounts being deducted from your check, right? And a lot of times it sure seems that way, that whenever we think about that you probably think it is toward it, certain times toward, I'm like, yeah, especially if you're going to be self-employed, that you might see that you didn't make as much money, but then still you pay taxes. And but the way I think about it too, though, that whenever it comes to tax credit, though, that the one thing I did want to mention too also is that whenever I'm like, yeah, what does it usually mean whenever, I'm like, yeah, somebody is willing to pay you more just for taking care of something? Well, what does that usually mean when, yeah, if somebody is wanting something done, let's just say that, yeah, they pay, that, yeah, that somebody, pays, more, pays more, comma, and then when they ask, when they ask for favors. Most of the time, it seems like that's the way it is. When somebody asks you to take care of something, like if it's paperwork or a lot of things that they don't quite understand about the documents, and maybe something that maybe they don't want to have to deal with or anything, if they just got a lot going on, picking up their child from daycare or something like that. And so it sure seems that way, that people might even say too that yeah, you may see that maybe in stores, or if you had to take something back, or walk into the post office, and if you ask them to take care of something, that yeah, a lot of times is that toward that yeah, well, you'll have to do this and you'll have to do that. But let's just say that most of the time, though, people might even say too that you go ahead and pay more just for ask somebody else to take care of something. And let's just say that if you're trying to take care of something important, if you're trying to get it done as soon as possible, then a lot of people would say is toward, yeah, if you're willing to pay a little extra just to take care of it, as soon as possible. And let's just say that if it is something important, such as maybe insurance or your urgent care or something like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that when we think about that, though, is that yeah, that most of the time that if there's any documents or anything like that need to be sent or approved or anything like that, and that's why it sure seems that way, that any documents or anything else that needs to be verified. And half the time people might even say too that yeah, are you really going to discuss about if you pay more or less? Someone pays more, or I'll just say somebody paid more or less. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that seems to be kind of like out of the question toward it. And if we were to put text right here and say that include like maybe the directions toward it, show me how or something like that. Show me how, and then I'm like, yeah, like anything apprentices or something like that, and then comma. So yeah. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that yeah, if people are willing to work patiently with somebody, I'm like, yeah, or if it could also maybe be something that's related to about the fact about something's getting taken care of for us, and you know how that is that that for the most part of the time that whenever something is automatically taken care of, or somebody else takes care of something that you can't take care of at the moment, or something like that, but still that the talk about for paid more or less. And so I usually see this a lot of times happening, like over there at the post office. It could also be at those stores. I'm like, anywhere you go, that if somebody's trying to take care of something right away, or if anything, that a lot of things that they just don't want to deal with. Maybe rebates on a receipt or anything, any surveys or anything like that. People probably don't want to deal with all that stuff, and so that's why they'll say is to where if they're willing to pay more or less, just to have somebody else take care of it for them. And let's just say, yeah, if it's at the pharmacy, and if like, yeah, at the pharmacy, some pharmacists might even say too that while you're healing up from you're recovering from from that while you were sick, those couple of days, that we'll go ahead and take care of the paperwork for you. And so it's like, yeah, a lot of times it seems like if you have to have like a doctor's note or any source of claim reasoning to where that, yeah, about why you're not able to take care of something. And that's whenever it sure seems that way that, tax offices, yeah, tax audits, and they're like, yeah, well, most of the time, paperwork, yeah, paperwork it's automatically done for you, and most of the time, I can say too that most of the time, it's really only done for you. Maybe if anything, if you put at least 10% of your work, of your hard work and effort into taking care of the process. So a lot of times it sure seems that way. That when we think about that though, it's like all the tax documents and everything, and I could thinking too that yeah, $3,000 seems like a lot of money. $3,000, it seems like a big number, and at the time you want to know too that we're talking about that that's a credit per child, or maybe for the group of 3 children, a family of 3 kids or something. And that's why it sure seems that way that that we probably thinking is to where that by the time we get our tax return, and by the time we get our paychecks, and it sure seems that way that goes by discussion to where that for who gets paid equally for their work and everything. But a lot of times it's like, yeah, well, sometimes it may not be about for who works, period, or that individual of the family, that they work a little bit, or but still that I don't really know if that has really anything to do with it. But I just really think too that whenever I think about the taxes, though, that a few things that I know is too about the taxes is that if we're talking about tax paperwork from nearly 3 years ago, and you probably want to know too is toward how come yeah, on average, is that how come you just can't keep the tax documents that were recorded from the past 5 years instead of 7? And if you want to know too, if it's taking up a lot of space, and that in the file that you probably want to know too, tax documents that are about maybe 14 pages long, and you want to know too is that why do you have to keep a lot of that on file? And so a lot of times it sure seems that way that whenever we think about tax documents, though, another way of how to explain it is over the fact that information that based on income, and based on and if there's any child born between certain times of the year, and maybe if you're still at the same address, and also anything else based on for which I'm like, yeah, a lot of things from the last time that you filed your taxes. And so it's like to me though, it's like whenever I first learned the basics about how to file my taxes. Of course, that was like already 20 years ago, and so it's like whenever I first start using it, most of the time it was over employment. But let's just say that yeah, of course by next year, of course, yeah, if you have a new driver's license or anything like that, but still that for sure, have a new driver's license and anything. I'm like, yeah, people may say that for sure, whenever you start making more money, of course, and then a lot of the information, of course, is going to need to be updated in that. But still, but at the time we want to know too that why is it that most taxpayers, that how come they cannot prepare for the future years. And let's just say that if they're going to say something like on that tax papers that that one individual of the family is going to be making that they're assuming that their salary is going to be $14.87 an hour, and you put on here like dash right here for for per hour right here. And you're probably want to know too that if you put that on the tax papers, and let's just say if you mark that for 2022 right here, and I'll just put the date right here, and let's just say if anything, it'll be effective by March of 2022 right here. And you're likely thinking too that really, why would anybody really want to put that on there, knowing that if it hasn't happened yet, and of course that anything that they're working hard on, and maybe anything that they're trying to set their mind for the future, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way, that if you could maybe put together maybe a document based on what you would like to see coming to your paycheck, what you would like to see coming to anything on like setting any sorts of goals, and you could probably do that. Like if there's a new child it's planned to be born, like anybody say, yeah, in 2 years from now, I might have a child, or 2 years from now, I'll probably be, I'll probably have a house or a car or something. And so if you're trying to plan ahead of time, but people might even say too that maybe one of the reasons why a lot of tax documents that are recorded from based on the past presentations, and they're all recorded. Yeah, recorded. I can say all. Reference. For reference. Based on analysis based on data from 2 years ago. I'll just say 2 years ago, but I really think too that in a lot of ways people might even say that sometimes it could be 6 months ago. I'm like, it could be maybe even be 6 months ago. And anything whenever it comes to tax documents and everything, and you're likely thinking too that ago. Like people might say, if you want to go ahead and put that in capital letters, it's all about ago. So whenever we think about that, though, is like in quotations, a long time ago. That was a long time ago. That was a long time ago. So a lot of times when we think about that, though, that that don't mean that the tax files are expired. And I guess like anybody say too that not expired. Not expired. You're not too old. Not too old. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that when we think about tax time, though, that you want to know too that why is it that you're always having to pull out tax documents that were recorded from nearly 3 or 4 years ago? We're talking about stuff that you were working on from nearly 5 years ago that you may not want to talk about everything. You may not want to talk about all the complications that you went through during the time. You may not even really want to talk about the fact about why you had to switch jobs. It could have been something personal, something like that, and that's why it sure seems that way. That every time I think about it, though, it sure seems that way. That the things that have been going on with your tax return, and I can thinking too that when we think about our taxes, though, that's another way of how you rewind the chapter. And if you want to kind of call it that, not really, but rewind. So whenever we think about rewinding a chapter, what does that mean? What does that mean whenever I say that? I like to talk about thinking backwards. Thinking backwards. Yeah, thinking backwards. That you think about, it's the past. Past data. I can also use analysis. Past analysis. It's all about thinking backwards. You're looking at the history of analysis. So anything that was recorded based on the tax documents from nearly 3 years ago. So it's like, so as of right now, it seems like that, whenever there's changes going on with the system, and I'm like, just about how the system works a lot of times. It's like about every 12 months or so that's, being recorded and based on money that you made and, from where you were living during the time, and also if there was any kids born between certain periods of the year, periods of the time of the year, but still that the way we think about that though, it's like you want to know too that why is it that maybe that tax documents though, I'm like you want to know too is toward it whenever we think about our taxes though. That why it seems like to me that why does it have to be more confusing than what it really is? And I guess you say that well, a lot of times it seems like due to the COVID and everything, but still that but the way we think about that though is that looking at our tax documents though, that it sure seems that way that that there's more than just 11 pieces of paper right there that contain information about how much money each personnel in the family made during the time, and also that the information about if one of them were students, if they're self-employed, or if they own any real estate property or anything like that. And so that's why it sure seems that way that whenever we think about that, looking at all those tax documents though, that whenever you first started doing some of your taxes, the first thing that came to your mind is that we're not talking about what how much does 4 go into 7 or something like that. Well, we're talking about, like anybody says toward it, if that's not the only question, to where how much money do you make an hour here, if you were to say something like 14.98. If you're making $14.98 at your job, but then maybe let's just say if you put on there and maybe a dash and quotations or something like that, that'll be effective by the year 2023 right there. So in case if anybody that may want to know too that why would anybody want to use it, like to do like an estimate? And I guess that's one of the reasons why that a lot of tax offices would say too that maybe that's one of the reasons why a lot of errors come up too, is that for what's recorded. And so it's like if you were to actually if you were to actually do the estimates by like do your own figuring out and doing your own estimates, and then chances are if you were to think ahead of time about how much money you'll be making an hour and all that at your future job, compared to from the stuff that was recorded from 2 years ago, from the past, right? From the past. And I guess that's maybe one of the reasons why that's why the system works that way, is toward it that the information that's recorded from the past, just because that it's been posted, it's already been clarified, and it's already available. So it sure seems that way, that every time when we think about taxes, though, it sure seems that way toward it. Why does it have to be more confusing than what it is? And it says to well, really, especially if they do changes to the systems and all that, but still, but at the time, though, it's like when we think about our taxes, though, that it's like, when we first introduced to how it all worked, that the first thing that comes to your mind is to where, are you getting any money back from the state or from the federal? But, still, that people might even say, too, that, yeah, well, if you don't like dealing with paperwork, then you'll probably say one person does the shopping and the other person files the paperwork and takes care of the documents and everything. So it's like almost every time I think about it, like almost all the time, despite about if I, claim to be a student, or if I'm claimed to be, I'm like, yeah, a property owner or anybody like that. And so let's just say that every time I look at my tax documents, though, it sure seems that way, that looking at my tax documents, I don't just see the amounts that I paid in taxes, and I don't just see the amount per hour. And for sure that whenever you look at a lot of those amounts, cash amounts, based on what was recorded on like a W-2 form, that I can go on, so say real quick too, that talk about for a W-2 form right here, that if you were to, I'm like, yeah, that W-2 form will say something like, yeah. Another reason why that maybe you can't prepare ahead of time is because maybe that that information is incorrect, and I'm sure that there will probably be a lot of errors in the system if you try to estimate the earnings yourself. If you try to estimate what the exact amounts are, and let's just say that if you're correct or if you're incorrect about something, but still that the best calculations, though, but let's just say that on average, that if somebody claimed that that they paid if it was $2,886 04 or something like that. Yeah. So a lot of times, if we were to do the calculations like that, and let's just say that if you were to put that amount right there on any source of tax document, and let's just say that information right there, had been recorded from only 3 months ahead of time, and so like let's just say that the way tax offices work nowadays, it sure seems that way, that you just sometimes that in case that there's any changes going on in Congress, that there's new rules that are passed into law or something like that, or if there's anything such as toward it that whenever it comes to understanding about how to do, I'm like, yeah, whenever we do the calculations most of the time, do the basic math right here, like do the calculations right here, and let's just say if you type on here that you earned about $589, and that it was for a bonus or something like that. For a bonus. If you earned a bonus. So when we think about we do think about math-wise, and the whole matter is that when we think about that, toward that understanding about understanding about the fact that with W-2 forms and other tax documents, though, and at the time you want to know too that, hey, why can't you just, I'm like, yeah, why do we have to always think backwards? Is that, yeah, tax documents that were recorded from 2 years ago rather than thinking about in the future. And like anybody says that, really that, that information, of course, is not, for sure, non-accurable. More likely that the system's going to probably tell you that, yeah, that's, yeah, the system. I know it. I'm trying to spell it, but anyway, yeah, but yeah, more likely that if you were to try to do that, if you were to try to estimate what those amounts are ahead of time, then chances are that it's going to come back, yeah, undefined, or like most systems would probably do that, or that if like if you try to change those amounts yourself or trying to figure out those amounts yourself, but still, that's okay. But you don't really need to put that on a tax paper, and let's just say if it doesn't match with what's on the system from earlier or something, and that can really cause a lot of mistakes and a lot of errors, and a lot of a lot of tax offices would probably encourage anybody that tax files, most of the time, it's like it's based on data from, yeah, if you want to kind of call it data from the past, but also that there's another way of how you calculate that. And so, like anybody say, that most parents and children would say too that whenever we think about that, though, looking at our tax papers right here, that whenever you look at that nearly 2 years ago, that you were making about $4 less than compared to how much that you're making now. 5 years ago, that you were making, $6, $7 less than what you're making now, or something like that. And so it seems like to me, just a little bit, it's like it's all about the calculation between more or less. The calculations between more and less, and so a lot of times you'll likely want to know too. When we actually do the math, though, that what exactly comes to your mind whenever we do the math right here, and like anybody say, you probably don't even have to do all the math really. What you really just need to do is that yeah, wait until you get the documents, and also just mention on the tax forms about how many children in the house of the household, and also that any other sort of questions, such as that about members of the household, and then how many of them had insurance, and how many of them that I had their, I'm like, so yeah, there's going to be questions on on the documents and everything, but still that it sure seems that way, that when we think about our taxes, though, that it's like you look at those tax papers, and for whatever reason, you might look at your tax papers, and want to know too, is to where you look back at 3 years of your tax documents, and I'll go and just say 5 years. 5 years of tax, 5 years, 5 years in history. 5 years in history. You begin to ask that question to where did it do? Do I think everything could have been better? Do I think that everything could have been better? And why would anybody really want to think about that? Is toward it whenever we think about our tax documents or any source of paperwork, though, that the first thing that comes to your mind whenever you first start working on something, that do you think that the whole process could have been a lot better? Do you think that maybe that you look back at some of your tax documents, and your 102 is toward it? Do you think that it could have gone better just because that something else that you thought of at later on at some point, and it could have been something that was not available at the moment. So a lot of tax offices would tell people that it seems like that's usually what happens. Is that despite about if you thought about that during a time or not, but still that during the time, if not everything was available to know yet, or not everything was you were not able to use all those recommendations or anything like that, during the time, and that's why it sure seems that way that whenever we think about our tax documents, so that if you practice a number of times even from home or any other source of conversation that you have, and you want to know too that really what went wrong with the whole process, and just wondering to where that you look back at 5 years, a lot of the tax history, and you want to know too is that a lot of things that I see that on a lot of tax documents actually, that you want to know too that whenever you take care of something and then you look at some of those medical papers and some of those tax documents, and you're probably thinking too that that a lot of things that you probably are aware of now that you were not introduced, you didn't have, you didn't know how to do that, you didn't think about this at the time, or you didn't think about that at the time, and so it sure seems that way that whenever we think about 5 years in history, whenever it comes to taxes, though, and you're probably thinking too that a lot of it seems to be odd because from how much money you made, and it could also have been taking care of an important bill, or maybe something that you may have missed, during the time that's really effective as of now, and so it sure seems that way. That whenever we think about our tax documents, though, that why is it that it sure seems that way that looking back at at the past 12 months, based on information that's been recorded, and you're likely want to know too that whenever we think about our tax documents, though, that it sure seems that way. Why does it have to be more confusing than what it really is? And it sure seems that way well, part of the reason is because of the fact that thinking backwards. So yeah, like I said before, that when we think backwards, though, do things change? I'm trying to say backwards. Do things change? Do things change when we think backwards? Yeah, when do things change when we think backwards? And I guess that's a question that we can all think about right here. Do things change when we think backwards? Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, rewind the chapter. It could also mean as toward that you just kind of pause and think as toward that try to think at the very beginning. At the very at yeah. So it's like to me, though, that seems to be pretty hard to remember whenever you first start working on something. And let's just say that if it was a year ago and you're trying to follow up about what you were working on and the things that you were trying to put together and everything, and it was hard, and that's why it sure seems that way. That people might say that if it's either if you have a calculator handy, or if anything, you just have to have the verification right there based on the tax documents. And so it sure seems that way that when we think about 5 years in history right here, and you'll want to know too is that a lot of it does a lot of that hard work and studying really pay off at some point. And like everybody else might even say that most of the time most children are going to maybe say is toward that by the time that money is there, then that's whenever they'll be proud. They'll want to go out and do their shopping, right? But at the same time, adults may even say too that there's going to be somebody that has to, do the paperwork, doing the studying, and then doing the calculations and everything, working in front of a computer, and somebody can go out and do the shopping and everything, and somebody can also be making the phone calls and trying to clarify everything at the tax offices. And so it sure seems that way that whenever we think about that, though, that whenever it comes to 5 years in history, do you think that everything could have gone better if, that whenever you do walk into a tax office, or whenever you do look at something, or trying to, if you're trying to if you're trying to send something electronically, you want to know too that the whole process could have been better, just knowing that how many times that you practice and something goes wrong or something like that, or maybe not everything, was well, was well processed. I'm like, oh yeah. So what exactly do you think that you could have asked for that could have been better? Well, really looking back at 5 years in history, though, it sure seems that way. That first of all, it's like you actually you think that you've done everything, and I guess a lot of times people may say too that I did everything. So that's the first thing. Any tax paper, like, anybody, any citizen would say too that anybody in the household would say too that if you've done everything, what's the problem? Well, I did everything. And so it's like, it sure seems that way. Even if it is applications, even if it is documents proving that people, everybody in the household, all the American citizens, everybody, that they have, the children are all insured through your insurance, through, I'm like, state verification of insurance. And also it could also be in regards to child care expenses, and it could also be maybe babysitter. I'm like, anything like that. But any other details about that on the taxpayers. But still, but it's like, whenever we think about that, though, is toward that we think that we did everything that we were supposed to do. And whenever we look at our tax documents, though, it's like usually that you're able to get through the process within about 2 or 3 hours timing, and sometimes it could be a little bit longer. And especially if there's people coming in and out of that tax office, and you're probably thinking too that it took a lot longer than you thought it did. And but half the time it sure seems that way, that by the time you get that surprise in the mail, and by the time you get the paperwork in the mail, and by the time you get a response from the tax office, and like anybody say that it's all about just knowing knowing how the system works. So everybody else might even say too that everybody, most of all of us seem to be mad all the time whenever things get delayed, and whenever things don't work as smoothly as what we expect them to. And that's another reasons why that it sure seems that way, that people argue about stuff. And but still that when we think about tax credits a lot of times, and allowances, though, and at the time, say, I guess July the 15th is, I'm like, but still that they're saying that just to review the information there. And but it sure seems that way, that when we think about taxes, though, that looking back at 5 years of our tax documents, and the first thing that you're gonna maybe think about is that you look at all your tax papers. And it seems like that that there are times to where that you may make a little bit more than or less. But it's like, when we think about tax documents, though, that how come that you can't think 12 months ahead of time than compared to thinking 12 months backwards? And the tax offices would probably say is to where that well, if you jump ahead to next year, then a lot of that data, for sure, on the system, a lot of that data is not going to be available yet, because according to what they're saying is to where, well, it's not available to know yet. And you know for sure that that's exactly what the data is going to show up, as to where it's not available to know yet because it hasn't happened yet. And so even if you did try, that it's just like, yeah, that even if you did try, that how come that you can't just do the best estimates and set a goal to where this is how much money that you would like to make, by this year or something like that. And so it's like, yeah, that when we think of our tax documents, though, that most of the information that's asked for, of course, yeah, that's based on the past, just for that reason, is because that most of the information, I'm like, yeah, people might even say too that, there might be some information that still remains not accurable, just because of the fact that, yeah, NA, just because that, information, I'm like, yeah, it could also be, I'm like, yeah, broader, I'm like, oh, yeah, but, still, that, but on the other hand, that whenever we think about tax credit right here, though, that it's like, yeah, that people who are filing for single, or I'm like, oh, yeah, but it sure seems that way, that why is it that it seems like that the tax papers, if you have more than 14 pages of tax documents. So let's just say if I were to ask the question to her, that if you have more than 14 pages of tax documents, then a lot of times people might even say too that that doesn't sound like a whole lot right there. And really, well, why does it seem to be so difficult just to be able to process everything? But let's just say that 14 pages, right? But let's just say though that one page, even just that one page alone, that if you're trying to make any corrections onto a document, or trying to get something corrected on your tax return or anything like that, and that's why it sure seems that way, that whenever we think about tax time, though, that yeah, there's a reason why that information needs to be updated. Needs to be updated after that 12 months period. $12 months of time. I can just say 12 months time. I know that there's 12 months time. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, whenever that 12 months had expired, and then that's whenever that the tax documents are going to need that more information about what's been going on. So it's like like anybody else would probably say too, that yeah, why does it seem like that, to where that either way that it should only take you a couple of hours just to fill everything out and just to be able to process everything. But let's just say though that whenever it comes to tax documents, though, that looking at your tax papers, though, and like anybody says, toward that if you were to make a suggestion on your tax return, or if you were to set any sorts of guideline, like anybody say that programs like an Excel file, or how you were able to do the calculations right there, and how you're able to figure out those best estimates. And I guess that's another reason why that they say that tax documents do not work like that, to where you can just think a year ahead of time on setting a goal to where that this is how much money that you'll be making during that year. And so it's like, say, yeah, the reason why that the system does it. And so like taxpayers would probably say too that that's just how the system works, is that whenever you look back at your tax paperwork from 2 years ago, that information right there will be provided. And that's why it seems like, to where that looking at those tax dollars right there, and just thinking as to where that that you know for sure that by the time that money is there, yeah, by the time that money, by the time the money is there, yeah, but by the time the money is there, or I'll just, I'm like, yeah, by the time the money is there, by the time the money is there, and then everyone will be happy. But but it sure seems that way that that if it's another way of how to introduce about that is how the system works. Yeah, that's how the system works right there. When we first figure out how to do that and how the system works and everything, how the electronic data works and everything, and so it sure seems that way that yeah, whenever we think about that a lot of times, that whenever we think about tax dollars and everything, and you want to know too that yeah, that whenever you most of the time that yeah, you gather up all the paperwork right there and everything, and you're probably thinking too that by the time the money is there, then the people are going to want to spend it, right? But still, at the same time, though, that you'll want to know too that looking at your tax documents from nearly 3 years ago, and you're probably thinking too is toward it, maybe half the time that you cannot really remember everything, for why, we don't count that as taxable or anything, any source of analysis that's reported on your tax return. So it sure seems that way that if we were to, and I can tell everybody here too that if we were to use 74,000, and at the time you want to know too, 74,000 right here. So this is like just a little bit of a trivia question right here. So if we were to actually doing the math right here, that this is like a trivia question right here. 74,000 between 54,000. If we were to write down the amounts like these right here, doing the math right here, we want to know too that doing the math like that, is that supposed to be any source of identity about for who's who? Whenever we file our taxes though, that and I know that that's according to what the tax code probably says too, that's probably incorrect. But if your filing status is going to be either single or married, then you got these tax dollars here. And so whenever we think about that though, is that if we were to actually do the calculations kind of like that right there, that if that's really supposed to represent, if that's used for like any source of identification or something like that, why would you want to use tax dollars as any source of tax identity, like any source of tax identity or something like that, just for verification purposes? Why would you want to use, or if anything, required by state, there's going to be, your name. I'm like, yeah, your name is usually like on the bottom of a tax return, but still, the way we think about that though is that have we ever thought about that on an actual calculator that your name is actually being used as like to represent for a tax amount? And in case of anybody that may want to know too, that if you were assigned a tax dollar amount on your tax return, do you think that you would be able to remember that? And even if you would be able to remember that, and that's something that you would have to keep on file for the next year's tax return. And so, like anybody say too, that if you could figure out how the system works and everything, and people might even say that yeah, well, what's your tax verification address? The amount, right? But you still that so any source of information that's going to be asked for, like on a tax document, though. And you're probably thinking too that a lot of stuff based on data recorded and everything, and you'll want to know too that your filing status right there and all those cash dollar amounts, and we're talking about academic grants. If we're talking about grants and scholarships and maybe bonuses and maybe opportunity credits or anything like that, and so a lot of times it sure seems that way. That when we think about this, that it's not the same thing. Like anybody say too, that you thought maybe memorizing your multiplication tables was pretty tough, but on the other hand, that whenever we do the actual math, though, that it's like you have like these values, if you want to kind of call it. It's like a value right here. So if we were to actually do the calculations, from a computer, though, that it sure seems that way. That a lot of these values, and like at the time, it's like, well, what are these numbers right here? What does that mean right there? What does this mean? And the way we think about that, though, and you're probably likely 102, if that's supposed to represent you as filing for single or for married, or if that's really supposed to be the cash dollar amounts, from what you earned from nearly 12 years, 12 months earlier. And so it's like, I guess another way of how do you want to look at it is toward it. That's another way of how to explain the tax code, based on, the state. And, but, still, that, so the way we think about when we do the math, though, and it's like, like everybody else will probably say too, that when we look at those tax amounts right there, and the first thing that you see, that you think about is that, for how much money you make a year at your job, and compared to how much money that's come in and out, like about every 2 weeks or so, that you're going to be thinking about doing the calculations about how much money that's coming in and out of your pocket. And you're likely want to know too that if you're able to keep track of all that. And everybody else will probably say too that well, good luck with keeping track with every penny, because that's going to be pretty complicated, if you could even figure that out. Yeah, good luck with keeping track with every penny. Keeping track of every penny, seems to be a big job. And even though that, it seems like it's equal to nothing, or, compared to, like anybody probably say too, between more or less or anything like that. But at the time, it seems like that when we think about cash dollars, though, or something like that, and you're likely want to know too that whenever it comes to tax dollars, though, and you're likely want to know too that there's going to be a new system or anything like that they're going to be talking about next. And you're likely thinking that, hey, you look at your tax documents, and almost every time you look at your tax documents, it seems like that you're going to be always asking the question to where that, what's this or what's that? And so it's like, that looking at your tax documents, though, and you're likely thinking as to where that, number one, you might find something missing in there, and you might also find out that, times that you made a little bit more, times that you made just a little bit less than compared to prior other times. And you're likely thinking as, most of the time that you're saying that, I actually, whenever I look at my tax papers, a lot of times it's like, that most of that money, of course, that whenever that money is there, and then of course whenever it's spent, and from about how much money that you make and all that, and a lot of times it sure seems that way, that whenever we think about our taxes most of the time, that usually I heard it's every 7 years that you got to keep it on file, but like people might even say too that on average that tax offices are going to ask you to where to try to keep at least keep 5 years, up to 5 years, and like for the most part, keep 5 years worth of tax documents. So yeah, keep up to 5 years of tax documents on file. You at least keep up to 5 years. And another thing that I want to talk about too is that if somebody, I'm like, yeah, if you borrow money, or I'm like, yeah, borrowing money, or if anything, which it calls like a pay in favor. So a lot of times people might even say too that if we're talking about maybe a babysitter, or if we're talking about maybe daycare expenses or something like that, what does that usually mean when we talk about pay in favors? Toward it, if somebody ask for money and then they offer to pay you back at some point, something like that, and so that's another reason why that it sure seems that way. That whenever you borrow money, whenever you borrow something, you're supposed to give it back, right? But let's just say that if that person's going to maybe tell you that if they recently upgraded to something new, or if they received a replacement, or they were offered another opportunity for something. And so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that whenever you think about that though, that whenever you borrow something, or I'm like, yeah, talk about for pay in favor. So I can also mention right here real quick is talk about for pay in favor. Well, what does a pay in favor mean? And as I say, it's like an opportunity. It's an opportunity to take care of another personnel's another personnel's task. So let's just say that so if somebody asks you to take care of something for them because they don't understand it, or something comes up and then they're needing assistance with that. So a lot of times, it sure seems that way that's usually, like everybody else would probably say too, that whenever it comes to negotiating, whenever it comes to talking to somebody, and you're likely thinking too that whenever it comes to taking care of, like anybody else would probably say too, that should the tax code also include paying more or less, for an opportunity or something like that. And so even though if you may not know that person very well, that you're probably thinking is toward it, whenever you first started paying your taxes, though, whenever you first started doing the studies about it, that you were mainly were taking care of it, you claiming to where you were taking care of your own tax documents, and you were also taking care of information based on what you had to take care of. But let's just say though that if somebody is willing to, I'm like, pay in favor, or it could also be about you asking nicely or something like that. So like anybody say too whenever you like it, it's like an award though. If you want to look at it kind of like an award, to where if you're willing to cooperate, or I'm like, be good. So a lot of times it seems like that most parents will probably say too, tell their kids that if they've been good all weekend, or maybe if they've been good, taking care of something, around the house, doing their chores, and then one person, you get paid equal amounts, per child. And but anyway, but the way I think about too, that talking about for $3,000, so, and we all probably thinking too that doing the studies right here, and you're probably thinking is that by the time say knowing about whenever people will be happy, at least for a while, is by the time by the time you start getting things done, by the time you start doing a little bit more of the reason, by the time you start figuring out, okay, that's how that works. But anyway, but you talk about for allowance, and so I mainly want to talk about right here, talk about with the allowance right there, and people might even say too that yeah, that if you want to look at it like an allowance, a credit like an allowance or any source of bonus, though, but people might even say that, wow, $3,000, that's awesome, like, but still that, so it's like, yeah, that $3,000 to most of us, it's a lot of money, but in a lot of ways, it sure seems that way. That are there any rules and restrictions about how to receive the money, and how well behaved that you really need to be, just before that you're paid that amount of money or anything like that. But it sure seems that way. That when we actually do the math right here, that like, yeah, that based on yeah, qualify for certain earnings also, but it sure seems that way. That when we think about that, though, that yeah, based on the tax information and based on the size of the family and everything, and that's the way I think about it too. That when we think about tax time, though, is just making sure that yeah, paying our fair share also, but then also in case we were probably thinking too that anything that you don't quite understand and everything, and that's why it sure seems that way. That when we think about the child tax credit right here, is that per person, or if that's all together, or what? But it sure seems that way. That when we think about that, though, that thinking about an allowance is toward a gift of appreciation. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.